Welcome back to episode 2 of the Patio House Tour during the holidays. As you can see, I'm in front of the large Christmas tree here in the main courtyard, and we're going to be with Tom again and take a look at all of the public rooms, and he'll explain some of the art and architecture in there, and you can also enjoy some of the holiday decorations that we have here for Christmas. And Mr. and Mrs. Raskob, of course, enjoyed Christmas with all of their children. There are many, many Christmas stories. You can find out about some of them in the new book that Tom has written and released that is out, and you can find it on our website. So if you have an interest in more detail, more than what we can say in about 30 or 40 minutes, please take a look at the book, and it might be of interest to you. But let's begin the tour. So Tom, we're in the first of 4 common rooms that the family would have used, and we're in the dining room, of course. It's a beautiful, beautiful space, a lot of warmth and ambiance, but yet it's sizable. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the room.
Yeah, this is one of the rooms where that $65,000 budget for finishing. The Waddleton firm was a decorating company, one of the go-to companies, like Tiffany would have been for other architects at another time. And they basically were the builders of this furniture in here. And again, because of Josephine Raskob Robinson, we are fortunate enough to have the actual furniture, the table and chairs that were made for this room. The luxury in this room is the walnut floors and the oak paneling and the magnificent ceiling with the Renaissance motifs. That is a plaster ceiling, but it's overlaid with gold leaf, green gold leaf and burnished gold leaf as well. So you get a wonderful combination of texture and color as you move from panel to panel up there. But I think the story of the furniture is pretty unique. When Harper, who actually asked the Raskobs to have this furniture included in the dining room, the furniture really was designed by Stanford White from McKinley and White for the New York City Athletic Club. And apparently they didn't like the design, so it wasn't sold. And Waddleton, of course, had access to that design. Harper proposed it to the Raskobs, and I think interestingly, Mr. Raskob, we don't really want to spend that much money for this kind of furniture. It's a little too elaborate. And Harper kept prompting him. He said, well, more utilitarian furniture is not going to fit this decor. It's going to detract from the room. But I think Mrs. Raskob probably had the final word, so the furniture is here. So this is all built by Waddleton just for this room. But what happened was when they moved, like the fountain, it goes with them, except it didn't go to Pioneer Point. It went to Raskob's New York apartments. I think it was about 17 rooms in New York City. It fit, so it was a very large apartment. But when he died, now what do we do with, like the fountain? What child wants the furniture? So Nina, sister of Josephine, was offered the furniture, but she was in an apartment and couldn't take it. So Helena said, okay, we'll give it to Cardinal Spellman in the New York Chancery Building, the Archdiocese Chancery Building, which was big enough because that was a McKinley and White building at the time. But then later on, that building, they moved to a more modern building, and this didn't fit anymore. So Nina said, okay, now I'll take it, because she had another estate in New Jersey. And that's where it stayed until she retired to Florida, and then it came back to the foundation here in Wilmington. And then Josephine, of course, got on the horn with this and prompted them, and eventually they sent it back to Archmere as well. This is an enormous table. It goes out to 20 feet roughly. Seat 34?
So right now it's set for 16 in this design, but the interesting thing about this table is it can be reduced in leaves to 7 feet round. So it can be form a small round table for intimate dining. It can be this large, which would probably seat the parents and the children, but then it opens again wide, so it splits down the center. You can put other leaves in, and it seats 32 for a dinner party.
Yeah.
They had 18 Queen Anne chairs in addition to these chairs that they would pull up to the table for dinner parties. There's an interesting story of the kids on their birthdays would be able to, the little ones, 2, 3 years old, run from one end of the table to the other to go from mom to dad or dad to mom.
Right.
As
It's
part of the
sort of
celebration.
a show-off time.
Yeah, and there are a couple of interesting stories that the family shares about food fights in here, where a lot of prune whip got on the wall. The sideboards are part of the set as well. They came back actually with blonde wood and had to be restained. But we don't have the original sideboard that was along one of the walls with lion's heads, gold, and it matched the black onyx styled or colored fireplace in the room.
Yeah, that was copied from the console that Michael mentioned was copied from the Vatican Palace. And I guess it's in, what do you know the name of her estate in New Jersey, the one she left? Because that's where it supposedly is now.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
But in any event, it's still extant apparently, unless somebody has bought it.
Two other short things in the room is this piece of handwork that was the original curtains that were hung in the music room. They're so delicate we don't have them rehung, but we do have all of them. And interesting, these are the demi-lune, or what would have been above the double doors in the music room once we go in there, with John J. Raskob's initials embroidered in each one of them.
And these are almost reminiscent of the dolphins, but they're not quite.
Not
but
quite.
A little
Not
motif
quite.
area in that. And again, that is the pattern that is being shown.
Yeah. The interesting story about the tea service is that it was a gift from the Raskobs to Mr. and Mrs. William Burrell. The Burrells were friends of Edith Raskob, John Raskob's sister, and the Raskobs were invited to the wedding. The Burrell family had children attend Archmere, and after generations of having the silver in the family, decided to give it back to Archmere if we'd wanted it, and of course we did want it. And it's a wonderful tea service that came from New York. It was Lenox China and the Maison Cartier. It's a Cartier tea service. So it would have given you a sense of how the family would have lived in the day. You had a morning set and you had an afternoon tea set along with the demi-tasse cups. In addition, they had some photographs of the day with Edith and Mrs. Raskob together, and with Mr. Raskob, and some photographs, also postcards, which are pretty common, I understand, of the house as it was decorated. So they would send little postcards to friends if they were visiting as guests or whatever in the house. And so they're strewn in this exhibit.
And I think that's pretty indicative of how generous they were to people they enjoyed.
Yeah, the story was they asked the Burrells, would you prefer a tea service or a car? And they chose the tea service, and we're glad for that. I don't know if I would have done the same thing,
No.
but the car would have probably not lasted all these years
No.
as the tea service has. So Tom, now we're in the living room, which Mrs. Raskob called a room that nourished the heart. So
She really wanted this room to be family oriented. So it's probably the least decorated, but certainly it's fine finished. You have mahogany on the walls, and the Waddleton firm, again, this is magnificent carving, these fruit garlands and baskets and runs of motifs, eggs and darts, to house a picture that was John J. Raskob. And this is where his portrait existed until they moved, like the fountain and some other things, the furniture, that went with the Raskobs as well. But in any event, we don't know for sure when this replacement, this is a reproduction portrait of a 1530s Renaissance gentleman, by an artist by the name of Bronzino, I think. But we're not exactly sure exactly when that came here. When I was a student, he was here. So we don't know exactly when that got installed. The finish in this room, again, is very mahogany, but if you look at the ceiling, it's very, very subdued. There's no gold leaf or burnishing or otherwise any color. The relief is very low, and it's light against the dark mahogany paneling. The biggest change, of course, is the floor. That would have been pine in this room, but it would have been covered by an enormously large carpet as well.
And we have sections of the carpet. These are remnants of what the original carpet would have been. So you can see the coloration of the room. It was actually in shades of blue and peach. Very, very, as you say, warm and inviting and calming.
Yeah, and the photographs we have of this room, it really looks like a room you want to come and relax in and not realize you're in a palazzo from the 15th century just beyond the door. Mm-hmm. It looks very 20th century, early 20th century, very elegant, but very comfortable at home. The floor is a great story, though. Great in the sense of how do we have terracotta tile here? Because that's certainly not what the Raskobs would have put there, right?
Yeah, so I believe it was in the early 80s, maybe around 1981, when it was discovered that the wood flooring here was infested with termites. And as a result, they had to be taken out. This room was actually used as the chapel when the Norbertine fathers lived here and used a portion of the house for their living quarters. So it was logical to establish some sort of a harder surface on the floor for an altar, pews and chairs that they had here in a circular fashion, and that's what we inherited. Now in the early, I guess in 2001, our last Norbertine living in the house moved back to Dalesford Abbey, and the house was really reappointed to be used for other social functions and also administrative functions, and the building and this particular room was returned to a lot of its original use.
Right. So it has the same ambiance it probably would have had for the Raskobs.
Yes.
Minus the organ console, though. But that's another story. We'll get to that shortly as well. But it is a lovely room. And by the way, behind you, just like in the dining room, that was a full Palladian door and window set. So you would access the east terrace directly from this room, as you would have been able to in the dining room, and as you will eventually see in a moment or two, from the music room as well. Mm-hmm. But at, I guess, the same time that they replaced the Palladian doors and window sets in the dining room, they replaced this one as well. That's probably where the termites came from, because that's going to be almost ground level out that side of the house. And we're on the north side of the house now, again, the side facing toward Pennsylvania. Now, we've nurtured the body, we've nurtured the heart, we still have the mind to go. Ready for one more room?
Yes.
Let's go this way.
So Tom, now we're in the room that cultivates the mind.
Yes, the mind was definitely important to the Raskobs as well. The library is another one of those luxurious finished rooms. The ceiling, another Roman vault. This time it's much more detailed than in the living room, and it's burnished in gold leaf, as you can see. More visible coffers in this, again with Renaissance detailing. The precious woods in this room, the entire, that wall, the one behind me on the east, and the west wall behind me here are black walnut. And there are 260 feet, I believe, of glass shelving that was actually installed here. Raskob, I saw one bill that he had paid $11,000 for library books. When wealthy people, although I think they probably did read most of them or had the kids read them, but a lot of wealthy people spent a bloody fortune on just books they never opened because they wanted their libraries to look used and look what for the purpose they were actually built. But that's not the case here.
Yeah, I had heard that Mr. Raskob ordered 3 sets of whatever books he desired, and encyclopedia were popular then. So he'd order a copy for here, a copy for his New York apartment, and then they had Pioneer Point at that time, a copy for that. And very often he would order additional copies for schools like Ursuline and Salesianum at the time that preceded Archmere, because of their sense of philanthropy and the value that they had in terms of learning and study. They encouraged their kids to read quite a bit
from the get-go, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, all the children went to Ursuline. I believe, right?
Yeah, I believe
As
so.
well.
In the grade school, yeah.
So this room was used for relatively more serious purposes. Of course, the floor is teak, and that's a very, very expensive finish as well. So this is part of the $65,000 package, absolutely for sure. I should point out where the wreath is here. You can see again one of the Waddleton carvings up there. Helena's portrait was up here, and she was a musician, and we're going to see that in our last room in a moment. But she's in that portrait, she has a blue dress on, and she's at the keyboard playing the piano.
Yeah.
And that, of course, went with, like his portrait left and the fountain left, Helena's portrait left as well. Interestingly, we have an alumnus who's going to donate generously a copy, a member of my class, as a matter of fact, is going to have the original Raskob portrait copied with the permission of the foundation. And also we know where Mrs. Raskob ended up with which one of the children, and they're going to give us permission to have it copied, and an alumnus from 1961 is going to donate that to the school as well. The table is another Waddleton tour de force in Renaissance style, used as the library table. And by the way, these are the Queen Anne chairs that would supplement the huge dining room chairs that we saw when we were actually in the dining room.
These are not the original chairs,
No.
they're replicas of what they have looked like.
Right.
And this table would have been in the living room that we just left as the writing table. It has drawers that lift out. But practically speaking, when we have meetings now as an administrative team, or we have classes or seminars in here, we use that as a table. Yeah. Under the glass of the table, interestingly enough, are remnants of the original library carpet that was specifically designed for this room, and that's an interesting story in and of itself. Yeah. We do own the original carpet, or it was given back to us once again by the family, but it's in our archives because it is so delicate and worn that we really don't want people walking on it.
Yeah, this is a high traffic room for
Absolutely,
practical purposes as
yeah.
well. Wasn't the carpet originally there was something supposedly, then it got switched?
Well, what happened was, my understanding is, when the instructions were sent overseas, I believe to Persia at the time, to design the carpet, they wrote the instructions out longhand with the coloration that they wanted and the design, which is supposed to look like bookbinding. So it's a very rectangular shaped carpet, very traditional style. When they got the carpet back, they got the design, but then they interpreted all of the handwriting as part of the design, because very much in the Aramaic language, they would use that as design.
Yeah, the script looked like arabesques and so on.
Exactly. So they had to actually take all of that extra piece off, and they used it in the loggia areas and other spaces.
Yeah. Can you imagine if they had used this in the library, and that would have been woven into the carpet as well. But anyway, on the table there are remnants of the actual carpet, so you could see most of this floor would have been filled by that. So this is another one of those spectacular rooms. By the way, the little piece at the far end, while not a spectacular, freshly created piece, was the desk that the butler used. Again, a gift from the family. We don't think it would have been in the library, but wherever the butler would have had that set up, of course, butler's a pretty important person in the administration of the house. So he would have functioned from that desk in some particular way.
So the Patio University, we understand Mr. Raskob ordered sets of these for himself for a number of years. And it basically is everything about science, literature, art, music, and you were supposed to read it by month. It gives you the first set has sort of the curriculum, and you're supposed to read one book a month.
Like the great courses.
Yes, and so he felt that every gentleman should really know for basically conversation about a variety of things. So truly a liberal arts curriculum designed in a series of volumes.
And especially in here, you could have a Renaissance discussion.
And then of course the other thing, these are his original books.
I was going to say, he had very expensive bindings.
And so he would select his own bindings. They were gold leaf.
Yeah.
And he had a special book plate made that shows the entrance to Archmere with John J. Raskob.
Yeah.
So these books are from his original collection that we received back from the family.
So now we only have one more thing to nourish in the body and one more room to see. Are you ready?
Yes. So Tom, now we're in the room that cultivates the soul.
And a lot of souls probably were cultivated in here. This is probably the most spectacular room in the ensemble, and certainly was part of that $65,000 finishing budget. We don't really know exactly everything they did in this room because it wasn't furnished like the other rooms to be lived in every day. It was very sparsely furnished. We have the two the throne chairs, which the Raskobs did leave, by the way, minus their finials of putti on the top, gilded finials. And they had tiger skins or bear rugs down here, and just a couple of benches or settles against the piers there between the doors. Now notice that the arches here correspond with the arches out in the loggia, correspond with the arches on this side, and correspond with the arches outside as well. Again, there's that reference to the repetition of and symmetry. Maybe you would have called this a ballroom if you were a Vanderbilt, a very small one. Certainly, I'm sure, musical performances went on in here. Mrs. Raskob was an accomplished organist. In fact, that's how they got married. He kept visiting her church, St. Mary's, and sat near the organist to watch her while she played before they decided to strike up a conversation, which ultimately led to where we are today. And in any event, she was very, very well trained and loved music all her life. Now, he did too, not perhaps the same type as she played, but I bet that's the reason for the organ being in the house in the first place. It was for her. And this is probably the room that has the most spectacular of the Waddleton carvings in it. The organ screen behind us is spectacular. It's something you have to put your nose up to and look at and catch the detail on. The woodwork around the dado or the wainscoting there, that was gilded at one time. When you get up by the sconces, you can see a little bit of the gilt that is simply just remaining, and just imagine what it must have been like in the very beginning. You have quarter sawn oak on the floor, copied from what had become a timeless pattern. This was started at the Palace of Versailles. It's called Parquet de Versailles, actually, in terms of its pattern. Mm-hmm. So each of the floors is quite different with a very exotic or expensive wood treatment. I think she had velvet, carmine, deep red carmine velvet on the walls, and big draperies over the arches, which would have been appropriate for the time. All the lighting fixtures everywhere in the house would have been custom made anyway. These feature acanthus leaves, and they're bronze, and they have a verdigris finish on those. And these are the original fixtures that were in this room. They have remained as well. So there were probably parties here. And if you look to your right, out here is the East Terrace, and there's another loggia out there matching the ones inside. If you opened all these doors, there's an outside extension to this room. So this becomes an enormous social space, depending on what they're doing. So maybe things when they have big events here, just like the school does now. Mm-hmm. You use this room for party events, weddings, and then it's cleared of furniture in the meantime. So the thrones and those settles or benches at the piers were the only things I have ever seen. There is a restoration of the original organ. Michael probably knows far more about that than I do, but maybe you would say something about what's going on behind that screen and below it. Remember the first tour? We saw where the pipes were. This is where the sound came out.
Yeah, so this Kimball console is part of the donation of the organ that came from a variety of sources. The fundamental organ, the bass organ, came from the Dresden family, Mark and Carol, 7 years ago now, and we took it literally out of their homes, pipe by pipe, and have been reconditioning it and installing it. But we've added to that organ to the point where it's now much larger. It's going to be equivalent to, if not larger than, the original Velti-Mignon organ that was installed here in 1916 by the Raskobs. And it was a player organ. This won't be a player organ, but it does have MIDI interface. So we have the advantage right now of using our technology to connect an instrument that all the parts date from 1880 to 1930, this refurbished organ, that will be enhanced by the technology of the day. So we can add to the stops, we can add to even the organ stops that are here below us in an organ chamber, and voice through this huge chute So basically what you see behind us in the organ screen is a chute for the sound coming from below us, with the exception of an antiphonal trumpet stop behind us. There are trumpet stops, trumpet pipes behind us. And then there's another organ in the main courtyard area called the antiphonal organ that adds sort of a surround sound. So if you think about this instrument in 21st century America, it's sort of like a stereo in your home. Or maybe even that's antiquated anymore with all the internet. But it is background music that would have been playing for the family. Interestingly enough, there would have been a Victrola slotted right into a side cabinet that was actually connected to the organ, and it would play the vocals of songs of the day while the organ accompanied with the player rolls. So very, very interesting instrument. And it wasn't only unique to the Raskobs who love music, but many of the grand homes of the period had organs installed. In fact, one of our alums sent me recently something he bought on the internet on how to install a practical home organ in your home, and it dates to 1888.
Wow.
So I don't know if I'm going to chance that, but it's certainly an interesting idea. But that is the story of the organ. Hopefully we're going to have it voiced and ready to play for organ concerts here at the house starting in the 22-23 concert season.
Yeah, and that brings up another point. Suppose there were a big social event. This organ could be just playing away as quietly, providing background music. Instead of renting an orchestra for your social event, you simply supply your own by putting the correct role in it. But that's this end of the room. I want to take you down there before we leave and show you that mantle down there. This room has a couple of features that don't appear in any other room, and I didn't mention them from that side. Before I tell you about this fireplace, the ceiling in here is very different. It's not a plaster ceiling. This is all hand stenciled in very Renaissance motifs. Again, you see those iterations of what might be a reference to a Rosario rose. Again, that particular motif is common in the Renaissance. And you have these wonderful scrolls, guilloche patterns carved into the wood and repeated up in the ceiling as well. So this was really a happy place. It was a vibrant room. You didn't come in here to relax. You came in to enjoy life, I think, really. The fireplace in here is one of the more spectacular ones. Not that there's anything inexpensive about any of the others that we saw, but this one is stained to pretend it or have it look like alabaster. And it is motif to reference some of the designs that are found in the Doge's Palace in Venice, which would fit this kind of an atmosphere. If you've ever been in that or seen pictures of those reception rooms in the Doge's Palace, you have murals and stencils and things like we see in this room, and of course in much smaller scale. Sadly, or happily, we almost lost this, but we did find it. When the school, needed money, and times were terribly tough along the way, they decided that this treasure could relieve them of some serious financial needs. So it was disassembled, packaged away, and never sold, fortunately. We found it in a garage repair pit over in the manor, and of course by that time the school was able to bring it back and put it where it belonged.
Yeah. And maybe explain that the reason why this was taken out is where we're standing, there's a marble insert.
Yeah.
But originally, when the school was founded in the 30s, this room was ideal because of its shape to become the chapel for the school.
Yeah.
So this was a high altar, and in pre-Vatican II days, you would have had an altar with the priest facing the wall.
Way.
And there was actually a chair altar rail here and pews, and of course the organ at the back.
Right.
And so it made perfect sense that they thought, well, we're never going to need this fireplace again, so let's try and sell it for some needed dollars.
Yeah.
And fortunately, it didn't sell. And we found it in the early 70s, I believe it was, and reinstalled it in a crate. Yes,
it was. But it's a magnificent piece. So when you get a chance to photograph some of these amazing, look again, there's that rose motif again. And when you look at the woodwork, you see the guilloche patterns, the twirls going up and down the woodwork, and then on the inner part of those casings, you see the roses again
Yep.
in wood that was gilded. So those Riario roses, or iterations of them, appear all over this principal floor.
Heraldic shields,
And
you can
yes.
see those, and you'll see a lot of
They
oak
reference
leaves.
Italian families
Yeah.
as well. All those families had, I guess, motifs that identified their family. The oak leaves, well, the which pope?
Julius II.
Julius. And then the Vanderbilts used acorns.
Yeah.
Deering at Vizcaya used seahorses. And of course, maybe we could use that dolphin if we borrowed a little bit of the story as well. Well, I think it's time to end our tour of this floor. We'll have more later, more detail, but hopefully you've enjoyed it. Michael, would you escort me outside, please?
Absolutely.
Obviously, this is your home, not mine.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
it's
a
all our
visitor.
home. You know, we're so privileged to be here. But maybe one last little family story of this particular room was one of the daughters said that when it was highly polished, the floor was highly polished,
socks.
one of their favorite things to do was in their socks slide across the floor, run as fast as they could, and just glide.
Yeah.
So we'll glide out of the room now. Well, Tom, I want to thank you
That's you.
for a most wonderful and informative tour of the first floor and some of the children's wing and children area of the house. And
It's been a pleasure.
It's-
It's a great place. It's
it is
wonderful.
I learned something new each time we go through.
And so do I, actually,
So-
as well.
So we want to thank you for being with us once again for another episode of the Patio Tour. And especially during this Advent and Christmas season, we wish all of your families the warmth and the wonderful feeling that this house brings to all of us. May it be a part of your homes, especially during this holiday season. See you next time.